"Remove this old man from my party. He does not belong here." Brandon's voice cut across the ballroom like a blade, sharp enough to stop the soft piano music drifting from the corner. He was pointing at me, not at a stranger who had wandered in off the street. At me, his own wife's father. 40 of his colleagues turned at once. Glasses paused halfway to lips. The laughter died in a single breath, and a heavy silence rolled across the marble floor of that rented hall. Brandon stood under the chandelier in a suit that cost more than most men earn in a month, his promotion still warm on his name tag, and he looked at me the way a man looks at something he has stepped in. He told the 2 security guards by the door to escort me out before I embarrassed his guests any further. He said a man like me belonged on a porch with a cup of weak coffee, not in a room full of people who actually mattered. My daughter Claire stood frozen beside him, the color draining from her face. I did not raise my voice. I did not lift a hand. I spent 40 years building things with these hands, pouring foundations in the rain, raising walls that still stand today, and somewhere along the way I learned the difference between a loud man and a strong one. A loud man fills the silence because he is afraid of it. A strong man waits inside it. So I waited. I set down the glass of water I had been holding. I straightened the lapel of my old gray jacket, the one Eleanor pressed for me 100 times before she passed. I looked Brandon Mercer dead in the eye, and I said 5 words. "I know what you are planning." The smirk slid off his face like wet paint. The color that had been so high in his cheeks went pale, a sick gray white, the color of a man who has just felt the floor shift beneath him. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His hand, still raised toward the guards, began to tremble. Because he knew. He knew exactly what I meant. He knew the secret he had been guarding for the last 3 weeks had just walked into his celebration wearing an old gray jacket. I leaned in close enough that only he could hear, and I told him to enjoy the rest of his evening. Tomorrow, I said, I would make 1 phone call, and he would finally understand what the word everything truly means. Then I turned and walked out, past the guards who suddenly could not look me in the eye, leaving Brandon standing alone in the middle of the room he thought he ruled. He believed he had just thrown out a tired old man. What he had actually done was insult the one person on this earth who could end his entire world with a single sentence. He thought he was the king of that room. He had no idea the room belonged to me. Welcome back to Dad's silent revenge story. If you believe a man should be judged by how he treats people who can do nothing for him, stay with me all the way to the end of this story, and leave the name of the city you are watching from in the comments so I can see just how far this story travels tonight. My name is Walter Briggs. I am 74 years old, and most days you would never look at me twice. I drive a pickup truck that is older than some of my grandnieces. I wear the same 3 jackets I have worn for a decade. Every morning I drink my coffee black in the same corner booth at the same diner on Maple Street, and the young waitress there, bless her heart, thinks I am a retired handyman, which always makes me smile into my cup. What almost no one knows, what I have spent 20 years keeping quiet, is that the soft-spoken old man in the corner booth built one of the largest construction and development companies in the state from a single second-hand cement mixer and a loan I was nearly too proud to take. I called it Briggs Construction. Over 30 years, it grew from a 2-man crew with 1 truck into something with my name on towers, on bridges, on schoolhouses where children now learn to read. I missed birthdays for it. I broke my body for it. And when I finally grew tired of the noise, when my Eleanor got sick and I wanted my evenings back, I did not sell it all off to strangers. I quietly moved my money into the things I understood. One of those things was a development and investment firm here in the city called Crestline Partners. Most of the bright young men and women who work at Crestline have no idea who actually stands behind the money that keeps their offices open and their bonuses fat. They know there is a major private investor, an anchor whose backing makes the biggest deals possible. They have heard him called the founder's chair. Not one of them has ever met him. That investor is me, the same man their brand new managing partner just had thrown out by security. I never wanted the attention. After Eleanor died, I wanted to be left alone with my memories and my daughter, and nothing else. So I let Howard Ellison, an honest man and my friend of 40 years, run Crestline as its chief executive while I stayed in the shadows, watching the books, quietly protecting the hundreds of families who depend on that firm to put food on their tables. And then, 8 years ago, my Claire brought home a young man named Brandon Mercer. Claire is the finest thing I ever made, and I say that as a man who has built skyscrapers. She has her mother's laugh and her mother's stubborn habit of seeing the good in people long after the good has packed its bags and left town. When she was a little girl, she used to ride on my shoulders through job sites in a hard hat, 3 sizes too big, and the men would tip their helmets to her like she was the foreman. She was my whole reason. When she met Brandon, he was a junior analyst at a small firm, sharp and hungry and full of charm. He called me sir. He fixed my back fence one weekend without being asked, and he did it right, with good screws, not nails. I will admit it to you. I liked him then. I even helped him, quietly, the way a father helps. I made a single phone call to Howard, never mentioning it to Brandon or to Claire, and a few months later Brandon had a junior position at Crestline Partners. He never knew it was me. He believed he had earned every inch of it on his own, and I was glad to let him believe it. A man should feel proud of his own climb. I know I was once. But the higher Brandon climbed, the smaller everyone around him began to look in his eyes. The charm hardened into appetite. The word sir disappeared. He started introducing me to people as Claire's dad, the handyman, with a little laugh that told them not to take the old man seriously. At family dinners, he checked his phone under the table. He corrected Claire in front of guests, in that calm, cold voice that is somehow worse than shouting. He spent money like a man trying to outrun his own beginnings. I told myself it was just ambition. I told myself young men get hungry like that and grow out of it once the world stops feeling like something to be conquered. I told myself a great many comfortable things, because the truth was harder, and the truth was this. The man my daughter married was rotting from the inside out, and I had helped hold the door open for him. 3 weeks before that promotion party, everything I had been politely ignoring came due all at once. Claire had asked me to stop by their house to look at a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. She was over at her sister-in-law's place that afternoon. Brandon was supposed to be at the office. I let myself in with the spare key, set my tools on the floor, and I was halfway under that sink with a flashlight in my teeth when I heard the front door open and Brandon's voice come pouring down the hallway. He was on the phone, and he was laughing. Now, a younger man might have called out, announced himself, ruined the moment for everybody. But I have spent my whole life learning when to stay perfectly still. So I stayed under that sink, in the quiet and the dark, and I listened to my son-in-law describe, in plain and cheerful words, exactly how he intended to throw my daughter away. He told whoever was on that line that the promotion was finally coming through, managing partner. And once it cleared, he said, once his name was on the door and his income tripled, he was done playing house. He called Claire dead weight. He said she did not fit the picture of the man he was becoming. He said he had already quietly moved most of their savings into accounts she could not see, that he had a lawyer ready to go, and that the prenup he had pushed her into signing years ago would leave her with almost nothing when he filed. And then he said the thing I will carry with me into my grave. He said the only hard part would be smiling through her father's funeral first, because the old man was clearly not long for this world, and a nice inheritance would make a comfortable cushion before he filed the papers. I lay there in the dark under that sink, an old steel wrench in my hand, and I felt my heart turn to cold iron. If you have ever heard someone you trusted reveal exactly who they are when they think no one is listening, then you know the feeling that settled over me. Tell me in the comments if you have ever found out the truth about someone too late, because what I did next was not at all what Brandon expected. I did not come roaring out of that kitchen. A part of me wanted to. The young man I used to be, the one who poured concrete and broke up fights on job sites, wanted to stand up and put Brandon Mercer straight through that drywall. But I have learned over a long life that rage is a fire that mostly burns the man holding it. If I had exploded in that moment, Brandon would have spun it. He would have called me unstable, a danger, a senile old fool who needed to be managed. He would have used it against Claire in court, and he would have won. So I did the hardest thing a father can ever do. I lay still. I breathed slow. And I let him keep talking. I let him finish his coffee and gather his keys and leave. And only when his car had pulled out of the driveway and the street had gone quiet again did I slide out from under that sink, sit down at my daughter's kitchen table with the dust still on my shoulders, and begin to plan. That evening, before I did anything else, I drove out to the cemetery and sat by Eleanor's stone for a long while. I told her what I had heard. I told her I was sorry I had not seen it sooner. And I made her a promise, the way I had made her one promise every important day of our lives together. I promised her that our girl would be safe, and that I would do it the right way, the quiet way, the way she always loved best about me. The next morning I called Howard Ellison and asked him to meet me at a quiet place far from the office. Howard has known me since we were both young and broke and certain we would change the world. He is the only soul at Crestline who knows that the firm's anchor investor and the old man in the gray jacket are one and the same person. When I told him what I had heard under that kitchen ceiling, his jaw went tight and his coffee went cold in front of him. I did not want gossip. I did not want a shouting match. I did not even want revenge for the sake of revenge. What I wanted was the truth, clean and complete and undeniable, so that whatever I did next could never be twisted by a clever lawyer into something it was not. So I asked Howard for two things: the financial records connected to Brandon's accounts at the firm, and an honest, careful look at the deals he had been running. What we found over the next 2 weeks was a great deal, worse than an unfaithful husband. Brandon had not just been hiding money from Claire. He had been cutting corners at the firm itself. On a major project called the Riverside Development, he had inflated the projected returns in the documents shown to investors. He had quietly steered fees toward a side arrangement that lined his own pockets. He had grown so confident, so certain that no one would ever bother watching the simple old handyman's company, that he had become careless. And here is the thing every careless man forgets. Every shortcut leaves a trace. Every clever little lie gets written down somewhere, in an email, in a wire transfer, in a signature at the bottom of a page. By the time Howard and I had finished laying it all out on his dining room table, we had a folder thick enough to end Brandon Mercer's career 3 times over and to claw back every single dollar he had ever hidden from my daughter. I am going to be honest with you, because you have stayed with me this long. There was one night, alone at my kitchen table with that folder open in front of me, when I put my head in my hands and I wept. Not for Brandon. Never for Brandon. I wept for Claire. For the 8 years she had given to a man who had been quietly counting the days until he could throw her out. For the wedding I had paid for with such a full and foolish heart, watching them dance, thinking my girl was finally safe. And then I dried my eyes on my sleeve, and I closed that folder, and I made a decision. I would not strike in the dark. I would let Brandon have his moment in the bright light. I would let him stand all the way up on the top of the mountain he believed he had climbed. Because the higher a man stands when he is certain he can never fall, the longer he has to think on the way down. The invitation to Brandon's promotion party arrived in gold lettering on heavy cream paper. Managing partner. A celebration of his achievement. Claire called me, sounding hesitant, and asked if I would come. She said Brandon had been strange lately, distant and cold, but that he had specifically insisted I be there. I understood exactly why. He wanted me there to play the role of the proud, simple father-in-law, the humble little backdrop that would make him look generous and big-hearted for putting up with me. He wanted witnesses to his kindness toward the old man. I told Claire I would not miss it for the world, and every word of that was true. If you have made it this far into the story, do an old man one small favor. Tap that subscribe button down below. Most folks watch all the way to the end and never do, and it costs you nothing at all, but it means a great deal to me. Thank you kindly. The night of the party, that rented hall glittered like a jewelry box. Crystal and champagne, a piano in the corner, and every important person Brandon had ever wanted to impress packed in shoulder to shoulder. He moved through the crowd like a man who finally believed the whole world had agreed he was special. Claire stood near him in a soft blue dress, smiling the tight, tired smile of a woman who can feel a storm coming but cannot yet name it. I stayed quiet near the edge of the room with my glass of water, just an old man in a gray jacket, watching everything. When the time came, Brandon tapped a fork against his glass and the whole room hushed for his speech. He thanked his mentors. He thanked the firm. He talked about vision and hunger and being willing to do what other men were too soft to do. And then his eyes found me across the room, and a smile crossed his face that I did not care for one bit. He said he wanted to recognize a very special guest, his father-in-law. A simple man, he said. A man who worked with his hands his whole life and never once dreamed this big. He said it was important to stay humble, and that he was grateful to have someone around to remind him where ordinary people come from. The crowd chuckled politely. A few of them glanced over at me with that soft, pitying look that stings worse than any insult. I watched Claire lower her eyes. I watched her draw her shoulders in, the way she used to as a little girl when grown-ups raised their voices. And something deep inside me went very, very still. But Brandon was not finished. He had been drinking, and the laughter of the crowd had gone straight to his head. As a waiter passed close by me carrying a tray of glasses, Brandon stepped back too quickly. A flute tipped over, and cold champagne splashed down the whole front of my old gray jacket. He did not apologize. He laughed. He said it was a real shame, that this was probably my good jacket. And then, in front of his entire team, drunk on the moment and on himself, he made the one mistake that ended him. He raised his arm and pointed at me. He told the security guard standing by the door to remove this old man from his party. He said, loud and clear, that I did not belong here. And now you know what happened next. You know that I set down my glass without a sound. You know that I straightened that wet gray lapel. You know that I looked Brandon Mercer in the eye, and I said 5 quiet words. I know what you were planning. And you know that the blood drained clean out of his face, because in that single instant he understood that somehow, impossibly, the simple old handyman knew everything. What Brandon still did not understand, as I walked out into the cold night air and let the door close behind me, was the second half of what those 5 words really meant. He spent that entire night wide awake, I have no doubt of it, turning the words over and over, trying to figure out how I could possibly know and what I could possibly do about it. He thought the danger was a secret being exposed. He had no earthly idea that the real danger was who I was. Claire called me at 11 o'clock that night, her voice trembling on the line. She apologized for Brandon. She made excuses for him, the way kind people always do, talking about stress and pressure and far too much champagne. I let her talk it all out. And then, gently as I could, I told her I needed to see her in the morning, alone, before she said one more word to her husband. I told her that I loved her more than my own life, and that whatever happened next, she was not alone. She was not weak, and she was not foolish for having trusted the man she married. She went quiet on the line for a long moment. Then she said, in a small voice I had not heard since she was a girl, "Dad, what is it that you know?" And I told her to meet me at the diner at 9 and to trust her old man one more time. The next morning I did not raise my voice. I did not send a single angry message. I sat in my truck in the diner parking lot, with the engine ticking as it cooled, and I made one phone call. I called Howard Ellison, chief executive of Crestline Partners, and I told him it was time. By the time Claire and I had finished our coffee that morning, the machinery had already begun to turn. Howard had convened an emergency meeting of the firm's leadership. The folder, the one Howard and I had built so carefully over those 2 quiet weeks, was placed in front of every person who mattered. The inflated numbers on the Riverside development, the hidden fees, the misrepresentations to investors, the kind that draw the attention of regulators who do not laugh at anybody's jokes. And right alongside all of it, quietly, the full record of the money Brandon had been siphoning out of his own marriage. At 10 o'clock that morning, Brandon Mercer walked into the office, still believing he was a managing partner. He believed his biggest problem in all the world was an old man who somehow knew about his affair and his divorce plans. He was already rehearsing in his head how he would charm and explain his way out of it, the way he always had. He never got the chance. I was there to see it. I want you to picture this with me. I walked into that glass-walled conference room in my gray jacket, the very same one, dried out now and a little stiff at the lapel, and I sat down at the head of the long table in the chair beside Howard. And I watched Brandon's face as the truth arrived in 3 slow waves. The first wave was simple confusion. Why on earth was the handyman sitting in the executive conference room? The second wave was dread, as Howard slid that thick folder across the polished table and began, calm and unhurried, to lay out the evidence of misconduct, page by careful page. And the third wave, the one I will remember to the end of my days, was the moment Howard said the words out loud. He said that the firm's principal investor, the man whose capital had quietly backed every major deal Brandon had ever touched, the man who founded the very chair Brandon was sitting in, had requested this meeting in person. And then Howard turned, and he looked at me. I watched Brandon's eyes travel from Howard, over to me, and back again, and I watched the entire structure of his world collapse silently behind his face. He whispered my name. Walter. He asked me what was happening, and I told him, quietly, that the old man he had thrown out of his party the night before was the very same old man who had quietly opened the door to his whole career 8 years ago, and who had now, just as quietly, decided it was time to close it. I told him I had heard every single word he said under that kitchen ceiling 3 weeks back. I told him the firm now had everything it needed to terminate him for cause, to refer his conduct to the proper authorities, and to recover every dollar he had hidden. I told him that the promotion he had celebrated the night before no longer existed, that his name would be coming off that door before lunch. Brandon did what every cornered man does in the end. First, he turned to threats, and then, when the threats fell flat, he turned to begging. He said I had destroyed him. He said I was a vindictive, jealous old man who could not stand to see anyone shine brighter than himself. I let him say all of it. Then I placed one more document on the table. It was a divorce settlement, drawn up by Claire's own lawyer that very morning, protecting everything Brandon had tried to steal, and triggering a clause inside that very prenup he had been so proud of, the one he himself had insisted upon, that voided every claim he had if he was ever found to have hidden or moved marital assets. The trap he had built so carefully for my daughter had closed instead on him. I told him the choice in front of him was a simple one. Sign the settlement, return every dollar he had taken, walk out of this room clean, and the firm would decide where to let the regulatory matter quietly rest, or refuse, and lose not only the money, but his license, his reputation, and very possibly a good deal more than that. His hand shook so badly he could barely keep hold of the pen. But he signed. Of course he signed. When it was finally done, Brandon followed me out into the hallway, his voice cracking like a boy's. He asked me how I could do this to family, how I could destroy him. I stopped, and I turned to face him one last time. I told him I had not destroyed a single thing. I told him I had simply stopped giving. For 8 long years I had quietly held a door open for that young man, asked for nothing in return, expected nothing but that he be decent and faithful to my daughter. The career he was now mourning was never something he had built. It was something I had lent him. And the moment he pointed at an old man and called him garbage in front of a crowd, he showed me, plain as daylight, exactly what he would do with everything I had ever given him. Then I told him the only thing I have ever truly believed about revenge. I told him the best revenge is not rage, and it is never noise. The best revenge is simply stepping aside and letting a cruel man meet the full weight of what he himself has built. I did not have to ruin Brandon Mercer. I only had to stop protecting him from himself. And then I walked away down that long hallway, and I did not look back even once. That was a little over a year ago now. My Claire is not the same woman who stood frozen at that party, shrinking down under her husband's words. The money we recovered, the money that was always hers to begin with, she used to do something that made me prouder than any tower I ever raised. She opened a small center downtown that helps women who are leaving controlling marriages get back up on their feet. It helps them find a lawyer, open a bank account in their own name, and remember who they were before someone taught them to make themselves small. She named it after her mother. Eleanor's house. She is steady now. She laughs again, that big, bright laugh she got straight from her mother. And a few months ago, she introduced me to a man named Daniel, a high school shop teacher with sawdust under his fingernails and the kindest, most patient eyes I have seen in a long while. He does not own a single expensive suit. He fixed the squeaky hinge on Claire's front door before she even thought to ask him. And the first time he met me, he shook my hand, looked me square in the eye, and called me sir, and I do not believe he will ever stop. He looks at my daughter not as a picture, not as a stepping stone, but as the whole entire world. That, in the end, is all a father wants for his girl. As for Brandon, the last I heard, he had left the city altogether. He works now at a small firm in another state, far from the rooms where he once felt like a king, carrying a mountain of debt and a reputation that follows close behind him like a shadow on a sunny day. He lives, more or less, in the modest little life he was always so terrified of, the very life he had been ashamed to be reminded of by a simple old man in a gray jacket. I do not hate him. I used to think I would, in time, but I do not. I just feel the quiet that comes over a man when something broken has finally been set down for good. People sometimes ask me why I did not do more to him, why I did not humiliate him in public the way he humiliated me, drag his name through the newspapers, make him suffer the way my Claire suffered. And I tell them what I have learned across 74 years of building things and losing people and building again. Anything you raise up on a cruel foundation will fall, no matter how tall it gets. You do not even have to push it. You only have to stop holding it up. A man who treats the powerless with contempt is already standing on rotten ground. Sooner or later, the ground always remembers. I sat out on my porch this morning with a cup of black coffee, in that same gray jacket, watching the sun come up slow over a skyline that has a little piece of my whole life built into it. And I got to thinking about how the world looks at old men. How quick it is to decide that we are finished, harmless, just in the way. How easy it is for a young man drunk on his own power to point a finger at one of us and say, "You do not belong here." But I will tell you what I told Brandon Mercer with 5 quiet words and 1 quiet phone call. Never measure a man by the noise he makes or the suit he wears. The quietest person in any room is very often the one who is holding the whole room up. And kindness toward the people who can do nothing for you in return is not weakness. It is the only true measure of a man there has ever been. A builder grows old. A working man finally lays down his tools. But the instinct to protect the ones we love never once retires. And it is never, ever too late to stand up straight. Look this world right in the eye and remind it exactly who you are. If this story meant something to you tonight, go on and hit that like button and subscribe, and tell me down in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who you really were? I read every single one. Thank you for sitting a while with an old man. Go take good care of the quiet ones in your life. And I will see you again, very soon, in the next story, right here on Dad's Silent Revenge Story.